Hey everybody, today we're talking about DC Infinite Frontier. Hey everybody, welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host, Brent. Today we're talking about DC Infinite Frontier. Yes, this was both a miniseries and a one-shot following Dark Knight's death metal DC event. And I picked this up and I read it because I was like, when Dark Crisis was coming out, I was like, oh yeah, all this kind of leads into Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. So I went back and I had been picking this up digitally on the Comixology app years ago. This was 2020, I think this was coming out. And, I read death metal, which kind of ended a whole lot of things and said, we're going to have a new status quo. Wonder Woman's kind of off doing different things, which is kind of what starts out here. Like what's collected in this big, thick trade, $30, is Infinite Frontier 0 through 6 and Infinite Frontier Secret Files. Well, like you really don't get to the main story of what Infinite Frontier is until, a good chunk into this book. Let me find issue 1. Yeah, it's like right here. Yeah. This is basically like issue 1 starts right here, about, almost halfway, because Infinite Frontier 0 was the new status quo 80-pager after Dark Knight's death metal, and then you had the Secret Files, which is kind of setting up the individual team members that you see here on the cover and who their relationship is to everybody else. So it's a little bit of a wonky read, I'm not gonna lie. I remember reading it in single issues and being confused issue to issue about what the plot was and what's going on. And honestly, this is not a very good story. It's written by Joshua Williamson. It's got art by Zermanico and a whole bunch of other artists, don't get me wrong. Stephen Byrne, Tom Derenick, Raul Fernandez, Phil Hester, Jamal Igle, Andy Parks, Jorge Jimenez, Joel Jones, Alex Maleev. I mean, a lot of these artists, John Romita Jr., Klaus Janson, Howard Porter, Aletha Martinez, Todd Knock, a lot of them are doing like little 1 to 2 pages here in the front with the Infinite Frontier number 0. But there's Jamal Igle with the John Kent Superman stuff. Awesome, friend of the show. And catch us on the Comic Timing Podcast, by the way, with Jamal. But yeah, a lot of that Infinite Frontier number 0 is a lot of these like different little cutaways to try and set up the larger world of the DC universe and set up events that were going on. Like I think it launched the Tinian Batman run, Fear State saga. Fear State I think was starting right after that, and or soon to come. This was all kind of like the reshuffling. Instead of going into 5G, we went into the future state, and then we had Infinite Frontier kind of reset the normal status quo. So things are a little bit jumbled in this first half of the trade. So, and because it's setting up the status quo of the DCU, it doesn't really have anything to do with the main chunk of this storyline. And then when you get there, once you get past the Secret Files with Bones, Director Bones of the DEO, kind of introducing you to all the characters, to President Superman of Earth 23, of Psycho Pirate, who also spotlighted Darkseid. You have Obsidian and Jade spotlighted here with Alan Scott. They're all kind of appearing here. You got Roy Harper, all these guys on the cover. Do they all really come together? They kind of don't. I mean, President Superman's part of Justice League Incarnate, and they've got Thomas Wayne Batman here. And what's going on with that? Well, that's one storyline. And then you have the whole thing with the JSA and Jade and Obsidian and their adventures. They're looking for Jade. Where did Jade go? Captain Atom's in here, and he blows himself up, saying Darkseid is. The Flash, Barry Allen, is in some sort of machine. What's going on with that? There's all these different little breadcrumbs, and they don't really come together until the very, very end in a non-satisfying way. And it's kind of like, wait, what's happening? Because every character is getting their own little mini story in terms of the larger story, but it's very unconnected, at least at this point. Reading the follow-up stuff doesn't really feel like, it feels like, hey, we had ideas and then we scrapped them as we moved further down the road. So maybe there's stuff here that was supposed to come to pass and didn't, But what you ultimately need to know, like, I think you could get away with reading Infinite Frontier number 5 and 6, right? And that would set you up for the next video that we're going to do, which is Justice League Incarnate, which definitely is required reading for Dark Crisis. But the last two issues kind of set up the stuff with Darkseid, and he appears, he's back. I don't remember quite how he died, if he was dead in Final Crisis, if that's the timeline they're coming from. He definitely appeared in the Darkseid War and the New 52, which came after Final Crisis. So that's kind of curious. But you also have Pariah show up here and say, we're going to have a new multiverse, and you have Barry Allen getting abducted and going on the Happy Earth Flash 1, the Happy Flash Earth, where, if you remember, in Dark Crisis, a lot of our heroes, the main Justice League, gets ported to their own little happy multiverse world in that miniseries. So that's kind of set up here almost a year before, I think, we got to Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. But yeah, you do have kind of the setup of all these other villains with the great left hand, the great empty hand of the Great Darkness, Darkseid, Eclipso. There's some hints at some other guys that will show up later on. But it's really not that good to read, honestly. Like, I was like, all right, this is required reading. I remember this. And then it's just kind of like these little mini stories that, kind of go nowhere. Roy Harper being a Black Lantern of some other world kind of goes nowhere. You have Bones and then making these Ultima Thule, which is from Final Crisis, right? And Multiversity, these multiverse warships kind of thing that float through the bleed. Those are, they kind of go nowhere. They crash into each other, and then that's kind of it. The main thing that I think that's necessary is the stuff with President Superman and Captain Carrot and Justice League Incarnate, or Justice Incarnate, they're called in this book, where you have Flashpoint Batman showing up and he's going on adventures with President Superman, and they're trying to figure out why he exists, but also the stuff with Metalhead here. He's kind of an alternate version of Iron Man on a different Earth, right? That is kind of the most central stuff in terms of the next book, not in terms of overall Dark Crisis. This guy definitely shows up here in Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths, and the next big event we're going to cover, but he doesn't really show up in Justice League Incarnate in the next book. So yeah, it's kind of weird, kind of confusing. And honestly, I finished this book not really knowing what happened, because a lot of it does happen in the final issue, and you're just kind of like, wait, what? Like, why? So yeah, and the worst thing to say about it is that you could skip all this and just read Justice League Incarnate, because in the fourth issue of this, there's a great recap of all the DC events, and especially the stuff the couple of things that happened in this book that you're like, oh, that's what that was? Why did I need to read this? It took forever to read because of all these specials in here. So it's a shame. It's got beautiful covers by Mitch Gerrits and all these, but and the artwork's pretty good. Zermanico's in here. You got Tom Derenick doing some heavy lifting. You got Jesus Marino doing some great stuff. But yeah, it's kind of a shame, honestly, because it's like just kind of a waste of time. So I would say skip it, honestly, and skip to Justice League Incarnate and watch that video next if it's out, and you'll get a lot more out of that. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next time in the Funny Pages.